I was reminded as I was listening to Tyrone do that song. There's a couple of different schools in Buddhism. Literal translation for one of them is called the Big Boat. The Big Boat says essentially is that the boat doesn't leave until everybody's on it. Train doesn't leave until everybody's on it. You can't have it one way and you can't have it another way. Train doesn't leave until everybody's on it. We're all one. I put somebody out there in the dark, somebody out there in the light. It doesn't work. It can't. Either we're all one or we're not. Either the train leaves or it just stays there waiting for us to make up our mind. In the Native American tradition, they say there's only two things to remember. One is that everything is alive. And the second one is that we're all connected. We're all related. Wonder what it'd be like if we really believed that. You know, you look at the world today, I look at the world today pretty much the same way. You see the violence, the hatred, the fear, the anger, the downright stupidity. All of the things that just almost yell, scream separateness, going against the truth of what we already know in our hearts. Mother Teresa once said, if you do not know peace, it is because you have forgotten that we belong to one another. We belong to one another. I don't know about you, but that's a tough statement to really take in. You belong. Sometimes I don't even want to be sitting next to the person I'm sitting next to. And now you're telling me we belong to one another? I don't think she chose that word by mistake. The reason why you are not at peace is because you have forgotten that we belong to one another. As we watch the news, as we listen to the reports coming in from one city and another city and all the senseless acts of violence, the mass, you turn it on right now, there's another mass shooting, we almost take it for granted. Oh, it happened again. And here you are being asked to believe that we're all connected, that we're all one. Come on, give me a break. All you have to do is look around you and know that that's not true. But we're here because we believe it's true. We wouldn't be here otherwise. And not only do we believe it's true, but I want you to take a step further than this. This is where sometimes our intentions and our prayers get lost. To take a step beyond believing that it's true, to being open to and believing in the possibility that the human race might begin to recognize that we all belong to one another. See, because I come up to that point every once in a while. Do I really? I mean, I want that to be true. I would like that to be true. But am I really open to the possibility that that is or can be true? Because if I'm not, it's wasted. If it's not, it's just an idle thought. It's a nice little wish to have, but it isn't really the truth. Am I open to the possibility that we could realize as beings here on planet Earth that we belong to one another? We are asked in recent spiritual literature to somehow or another become aligned to the idea or the sense or the energy of oneness. And what that means is, I don't think anybody really took the time to explain that word. What that word means, it goes beyond a thought, it goes beyond the idea of, oh, isn't it nice that we're all connected, we're all one, isn't that nice? We make a little fortune cookie out of that. We make a little doily, we put it on the table. We're all one. But to align ourselves to the energy of oneness. And what that means is, let's suppose, an example I can give you. Let's suppose somebody says to me, I love you. Well, that sounds nice. It feels good. It's warm and fuzzy. It's nice. I love people to say that. But if I'm not aligned to that energy, I'm just sort of taking it in as a nice little thought and a nice little emotion. But the reality is that if I align myself to the truth of that, I will take that energy into my heart and I will allow it to open me and soften me and open my heart and my senses into compassion. It's very, very different between knowing it as a thought and experiencing it as an experience. It's like the difference between looking out the window someday and seeing the sun shining and saying, oh, it looks so nice and warm outside. That's a thought, that's an idea, it's an observation, a sensory. But actually putting on your coat and walking outside and sitting in the sunshine is a tremendously different experience than just saying, oh, isn't that nice? What we are being asked to do here at Unity, not just this Sunday morning, but I think what Unity stands for, the whole bit, is all about aligning ourselves to the energy of oneness, to the energy of one consciousness, that we are all one, and aligning ourselves to that energy and allowing one another to align ourselves to that as well. If you're not doing that, it's not working. The way the Buddha expressed it so beautifully, I think, in his golden rule was, you know how it normally goes, love God and love your neighbor. He said this very simply. See yourself in others, who then shall you harm? See yourself in others, who then shall you harm? Because we are all one. I hate New York. I hate the cold. I hate so-and-so over there. You know what? They're not doing anything to me. New York's just being New York. The cold's just being the cold. So-and-so over there is just being, that's just their personality. That's not who they are. So-and-so is just doing their being the way I would like to do mine. They're not doing anything to me. As Reverend David expressed last week, nobody's doing anything to me. Whoever's doing the doing is me. As we say metaphysically, if you see it out there, guess where it starts? It starts right here. One of my friends in Al-Anon used to describe Carl Jung's idea of the shadow as being simply this: if you spot it, you got it. If you see it out there, guess what? It's going on. As much as you might not like it, it's going on right in here. You know, in the 80s, we got so wrapped up in codependency and taking care of our little selves that we lost track of the spiritual gifts of compassion, forgiveness. We got so busy protecting our own limited identity, we forgot who we were. And I can remember this because I was one of those teachers. I didn't make $1 billion like somebody who moved to Hawaii, but I was one of those teachers too as well. And I can remember, being all wrapped up in that consciousness and coming across these words from Albert Schweitzer. Now remember, this is in the midst of me making boundaries between me and you, because I need to make boundaries between me and you. And Schweitzer comes out and says, if ever there is a person who is tired, alone, sick, or hungry, he is my responsibility. I went, oh, how codependent that is. Really? Maybe it was. But notice the leap it took beyond the physical level, beyond the emotional level, beyond the personal level, went beyond that into a higher truth and say, that because, because he belongs to me. And I belong to him. I love my talks to be nice and neat, follow a nice logical frame of reference, and end up in a nice little package that I can tie up in a bow. And that's not going to be happening this morning. Because relationships are messy. All right? And this talk's going to be messy. Are you willing to get messy? Because that's okay. Relationships, when they come from our ego consciousness, our limited consciousness, divide themselves into three categories. If you walk into a room, you will see three sets of people. Those who you can control, those who are trying to control you, and those who are irrelevant. And that's it. Control, be controlled, irrelevant. And you know, we have much more sophisticated ways of looking at that, but it's always true. Now it's really interesting here, you come walking into a sanctuary like this one, and all of a sudden that changes. It doesn't fit. I just can't do that. It's still there. I still might be looking at somebody and saying, why are they dressed like that for? It's still there, but it sort of gets a little bit erased and pushed over to the side and say, I walk through those doors and I say to myself, or I anchor myself into a truth and says, how can I see myself and how can I see all of these other people out there for the truth of who they are? How can I be a little bit, we don't say this consciously, but I think we say, how can I allow myself to be a little bit edgy? Knowing somebody for who they are and knowing myself for who I am doesn't always feel, in fact, it feels a little bit vulnerable every once in a while. Am I willing to be vulnerable? Am I willing to be open? Am I willing to be loved? Am I willing to allow myself to be open, to be loving towards another, to allow someone to love me? Now I know the ego gets a lot of bad press, and I'm not about here to give it any more. But when we speak of ego consciousness, all we're talking about is a limited awareness. It's when I think that I'm kind of this lost, separate individual that has to protect itself all the time. That's my ego consciousness. And all I have to do, it doesn't go away just because I recognize something else, but just being able to realize, yes, I have that, but it's not who I am. And because it's not who I am, it's not who you are either. I remember a friend of mine used to say, you know, I love everybody when I'm by myself. Oh, wait a minute, that wasn't my friend, that was me, I said that, right? And it's really true. It's really, because the only ego that exists when I'm by myself is mine, right? There's nothing for it to rub against. You know, when we see or hold a little baby, you know, just right, they don't have an ego yet. So everything they do is wonderful. Even their poop is wonderful. Oh, look at that little poop. But give it about 3 months or 6 months, and all of a sudden, an ego begins to form and starts, oh, why can't they have the same problem they had yesterday? Oh, did you have to throw up now? Oh, I just changed you. All of a sudden, this little ego starts to develop, and without me even realizing it, it starts rubbing against mine. Because that's what egos do. They rub against one another. And it's the mentality, not just of a little baby, because we do this as grown-ups as well, and sort of being in protective mode, this small little self, living in not enoughness, living in separateness. I've forgotten myself again and again and again. I might have shared this already, but if I have, it's worth saying again. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of ours invited us to watch this online broadcast of this sort of a group session of people who shared their life experience with one another. And it was nice, it was okay, it wasn't something that Margot and I were terribly attracted to, but we stayed there for the hour and a half it was going on. And then right at the end, the lady who was leading the group said, you know, I'd like to ask these two new people if they just share a little bit of something they might be grateful for. And so I said something wonderful, flowery, as I usually do. I can make up stuff like that on the spot, okay? So I said something really, you know, moving energetically and nice. And then Margot's turn, and Margot said, you know, I am so grateful for this wonderful man that I married. And I went, who's she talking about? Somebody else in this room. And it was really amusing because that was my not enoughness just kicked right in again. Couldn't be me. But what was so different about it, and this is just a little indication that I've grown a little bit, was that I thought it was funny. That my mind immediately went to that lack, that not enoughness. And I said, I was able to catch it in time before I'd ate my lunch and just say, oh, there it is again. Still there. I'm not enough. I am. I know that I'm enough, but I don't believe it yet all the time. Get the difference? I know it's true, but I don't believe it all the time yet. But I'm grateful that it's possible for me to get there. There's a model that I'm working on to try to explain or get across the idea of oneness as well as still having an identity. Because that's sort of a very paradoxical thing in metaphysical schools. You still have an identity, but we're all one. It's kind of like saying, we're all one, but it's my remote. Okay? It's all one, but it's my car. So I was kind of debating this one and trying to see myself through this one way or another. But what I came to was this, and I'm trying to expand on this. Maybe I can do this some other time a little bit later on. But this whole idea of we're born and we grow into a personality and an ego consciousness that becomes our identity. I mean, that's natural. We all do that. It's just part of life here on planet Earth. My identity becomes, and eventually, in some point in time, I begin to think that's who I am. This identity and this personality that I forget that I've created it. I think it's who I am. And I stick with that up until a point until I finally realize there must be more to it than that. And what I've begun to think of is this, that in a spiritual way, somehow or another, we are able to take this personality self, this ego consciousness that we think we are, say, I know that's not, I have that stuff, it's not who I am. But what I'm going to choose to do, because since I am a divine being, I am the light of Christ. Since I am a divine being, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow that personality and that ego consciousness that I've created, I'm going to allow that to be the lens through which the divine light shines through. And so for each one of us, what I'm seeing right now is not just, I'm not seeing you as being the lens, I'm seeing you as being the lens through which the divine light shines through. And that is going to be unique for each one of us. It is a pattern that is never going to be repeated again. The energy that you put in and the wisdom that you put in and all of the stuff you put into creating your personality and your ego consciousness, that is never going to be repeated. That unique lens that you are is never going to be repeated. And so here's Margot, which is the divine light expressing itself through Margot as this name, as this personality, as this is Joe, is John, is Gerry, is Joan, is this, is that. That's really instead of seeing the personality, instead of seeing the ego consciousness as being an identification that this is it, I'm seeing you again and again and again as being a reflection of the divine light shining through. You are the lens through which the divine light shines through. Now, when I open myself up to another human being, I expect, see, when I open myself up to another human being, I'm really dropping all of this stuff around my ego consciousness, my personality. So I'm sort of dropping that, letting that go for a while, and I want to open myself up to you loving me as best as you possibly can, and me being open to that love as best as I possibly can. And I think that's probably what's going to happen there is the light's going to go on, and birds are going to be singing, and butterflies are going to be flying all over the place. And that's not what happens. One of the messiest things that happens when I allow somebody to love me is all of my stuff comes up. All of the stuff that has remained hidden, all of the stuff that's part of my shadow, all of the stuff that I thought I was not, all of the stuff that I thought I hid away so neatly. And you come along in my life and say, I love you. And all of a sudden, all this stuff comes up. And what messes my mind up so much, I think all that stuff is coming up because you did something to me. And you didn't do anything to me except allow yourself to love me. What the stuff that comes up in my life, all of that stuff that's hidden, is not your fault. It's all my stuff, and this reason why it came up in the first place is so that it can be healed. My woundedness comes out, and I let you see me with all my warts. And we're all wounded. We all in need of healing. And we realize we can't begin to do that just by ourselves. We need one another to remind ourselves of our goodness, our strength, our joy, and our power. Even though it's not your job to heal me, when you love me and when I love you, what we do is we give one another a space in order to be able to heal, a safe space in order to be able to heal. I allow that to happen. I don't do it for you. I don't do it to you. But I give you the opportunity to allow that healing to happen. There's a Sufi story, comes from the Islamic tradition. Mullah Nasruddin, who's the everyman, the one who is, some days he's a sinner, some days he's a saint, some days he's a wise man, some days he's a fool. And he says he's had a lot of trouble with relationships. And one day he says to his friends, he says, I'm going away for a while. I'm going to find the perfect woman. And they said, okay, well, goodbye, Mullah. See you later. And he's gone for a really long time. And he comes back, and all his friends gather around and say, did you find the perfect? He said, I found the perfect woman. Well, where is she? He said, alas, she was looking for the perfect man. Relationships by their very nature stretch us. It's like Scott Peck in his definition of love and the road less traveled. He said, love is the ability to stretch oneself for one's spiritual growth or the growth of another. How do I know I'm loving myself, loving another? Am I stretching? Is it stretching me? And I got a couple of other things that I could be here all morning, and I know you start throwing things at me after a while. Course in Miracles talks about special relationships. And I can remember when I first heard that, I found that really annoying. Because I had special relationships in my life. Margot, my grandkids, I could think of a number of other people that I really and deeply loved. And a whole other bunch of people that were, let's say, essentially somewhat irrelevant, right? They were okay, and I loved them, and I cared about them, and I liked them at a distance, but they didn't really play much of a role in my life. So there were what I call special relationships. But I knew there was something edgy about that I wasn't quite aware of, so I allowed myself to sit with that for a minute. Instead of making a judgment and taking Course in Miracles and throwing it across the room, which I've done a few times, by the way, I said, I think I'm going to sit with this one because there's a truth here that I'm not quite exposed to yet. So I sat with it for a while, and I prayed with it, and I meditated with it, and this, I hate to say this voice because that sounds kind of schizophrenic, but I'll say it anyway. This voice said to me, you know, let's look at the special relationships a little bit. You know how you love Margot and your grandkids and a few other people in your life? And I said, yes. That's how you're being asked to love everybody. I said, oh, I got it. That's how you're being asked to love everybody. That's how you're being asked. We belong to one another. That's how you're being asked to love everybody. What would it be like, or are you willing? Are you willing to let me be who I am, not who you think I should be? Are we willing to meet one another as souls on a journey rather than egos in competition? Are you willing to love yourself no matter what? Are you willing to see God in yourself and see the other until you see God? Are you willing to give up your self-centeredness and your not enoughness? Can you be open to wondering how many times are there those who are silently holding me in prayer, in loving thought, that are completely unknown to me? Which brings me to the haunting possibility that it makes a difference to every person I am around or even pass in the hall of the street what kind of energy I'm emitting. What am I giving out? Am I realizing that the reason why I'm not at peace is because I have forgotten we belong to one another? Can I remember to the depth of my being that wonderful phrase and teaching from Ram Dass? We're all walking one another home. We are all walking one another home. May all beings be at peace. May all beings be free of suffering. And may all beings remember who they are. And may all beings remember we belong to one another. Thank you.